If you drive 45 minutes northeast of downtown Atlanta, past the glittering corporate headquarters and the endless snarl of interstate traffic, the landscape changes with jarring speed. It is not the rolling hills or the pine forests of the traditional American South that catch your eye. It is the silence. Row after row of identical, pristine, two-story modern farmhouses sitting on perfectly manicured plots of red Georgia clay, completely devoid of human life. The lawns are emerald green, artificially laid turf, watered by automated irrigation systems paid for by frantic corporate balance sheets. The windows are crystal clear, reflecting a blinding southern sun. But look closer. There are no cars in the driveways. There are no curtains in the windows. There are no children playing on the brand new cul-de-sacs. This is not a historic ghost town abandoned after a gold rush dried up or a factory closed its doors. This is something far more calculated. This is a ghost town built entirely from scratch, funded by billions of dollars in speculative Wall Street capital, and completed just months ago. Right now, the state of Georgia is zero for one of the most violent, unhinged real estate miscalculations in modern American history. For the past few years, the narrative surrounding the Sun Belt was simple, an unstoppable economic miracle. People were fleeing the high taxes of New York and the astronomical costs of California, moving to a promised land of cheap land and endless economic growth. Atlanta was the crown jewel of this migration. But corporate developers mistook a temporary pandemic panic for a permanent shift in human geography. They looked at a brief spike in remote work and saw an infinite money glitch. They bought up thousands of acres of cheap agricultural dirt far outside the city perimeter, bypassed local zoning intentions, and began pouring concrete at a pace that defied economic gravity. They built for a world of 3% mortgage rates and limitless consumer optimism. Then, the math changed. The Federal Reserve slammed the brakes on the global economy, interest rates spiked to 20-year highs, and the entire illusion evaporated overnight. But the bulldozers did not stop. You cannot turn a multi-billion-dollar corporate home-building apparatus around on a dime. Because of massive contractual obligations, supply chain inertia, and institutional stubbornness, these companies kept building. They hammered the final nails into thousands of homes that they knew, with absolute mathematical certainty, the local population could no longer afford to buy. The result is a localized real estate trap of historic proportions. In 10 specific Georgia suburbs, the desperation among corporate builders has reached a literal boiling point. We are witnessing an unprecedented corporate fire sale where multi-billion-dollar developers are acting like desperate pawnshop owners, throwing everything from $15,000 cash incentives to free luxury appliance packages and predatory mortgage rate buy-downs at anyone who can still qualify for a loan. They are bleeding cash through carrying costs, property taxes, and soaring insurance premiums on empty structures. The sheer scale of this crisis is being masked by national real estate headlines that claim inventory is still tight. It is a lie of averages. If you zoom into the outer rings of the Atlanta metro area, active housing inventory has not just grown. It has exploded by 40, 60, and in one catastrophic case, 85% in a single year. Cancellation rates for new construction contracts are pushing past 20%. 1 in 4 buyers is willingly walking away from their earnest money deposits, choosing to take a 5-figure financial hit rather than hitching their futures to a falling knife. But the real horror story is not the empty houses. It is what this artificial supply shock is doing to the people who already live there. Everyday families who bought at the absolute peak of the market are watching their single largest source of wealth completely evaporate. When a massive corporate builder realizes they are holding billions in toxic, stagnant inventory, they do not hold out for a fair price. They liquidate. They slash listing prices by $30,000, $40,000, or $50,000 overnight on identical homes right next door to families who just took out a massive mortgage. In a matter of weeks, entire neighborhoods are thrown into negative equity. Trapped in a financial prison created by a boardroom decision made 3 states away, how did a region famous for its historic charm turn into a hyper-financialized clearance rack? The answer lies in a complex web of corporate hubris, local political complicity, and a bizarre geographic vulnerability that makes the Atlanta exurbs uniquely susceptible to this kind of systemic collapse. There is one specific northern community that completely lost its mind, printing building permits like monopoly money, setting up a financial time bomb that is about to detonate the entire regional market. To understand how we got here, and how to avoid becoming the next casualty of this corporate real estate wrecking ball, we have to look past the shiny marketing brochures and examine the raw, unfiltered mechanics of the trap. The roots of the Georgia suburban housing crisis are buried in a unique mix of aggressive state-level tax incentives, a totally unhinged local permitting structure, and the physical reality of the Atlanta geography. Unlike landlocked metropolises like Miami or land-scarce islands like New York, Atlanta has zero natural barriers. It possesses no oceans, no major mountain ranges blocking outward expansion, and no restrictive statewide boundaries. The city can expand infinitely in 360 degrees, swallowing up rural timberland and old cattle pastures at the whim of anyone with a fleet of bulldozers and a line of corporate credit. This specific geographic feature has historically made the region a playground for speculative residential development, but it also created a deadly structural trap the moment demand stumbles. The sheer ease of adding new supply guarantees a catastrophic inventory pileup. The specific mechanism for this overbuilding began during the mid-2010s, but it accelerated violently between 2020 and 2022. Following the passage of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, institutional capital flooded into the single-family residential market through specialized real estate investment trusts and build-for-rent corporate vehicles. Georgia became a primary target due to its extremely low corporate regulatory hurdles and highly fragmented county governments. In the state of Georgia, zoning decisions are heavily decentralized, managed at the individual county or municipal level rather than through a cohesive regional authority. For rural counties sitting 40 to 60 miles outside the city center, such as Paulding, Barrow, and Jackson, the sudden influx of national home builders offering millions of dollars in immediate permit fees and future property tax revenue was intoxicating. Between January 2021 and December 2022, local planning commissions in these outer ring counties approved residential subdivisions at a rate that completely detached from local population trends or employment data. In Barrow County alone, residential building permits for single-family homes surged by over 54% in a 24-month window, according to historical data from the United States Census Bureau. Local part-time county commissioners, often running on shoestring municipal budgets, lacked the analytical resources to project the long-term infrastructure impact or the macroeconomic stability of these developments. They signed off on high-density residential zoning in areas completely lacking adequate sewage lines, widened roadways, or local employment hubs, operating on the flawed assumption that the migration boom would last forever. The economic trigger that transformed this aggressive expansion into a market trap occurred on March 17, 2022, when the Federal Reserve initiated its aggressive interest rate tightening cycle. Over the course of the next 18 months, the benchmark federal funds rate was pushed from near zero to over 5%, causing the average 30-year fixed mortgage rate in the United States to skyrocket from roughly 3.2% to a peak of nearly 8%. This sudden macroeconomic shift completely altered the affordability equation for the average American household. In 2021, a buyer looking at a $400,000 home in a suburb like Loganville or Canton could expect a principal and interest monthly payment of approximately $1,400. By late 2023, that exact same purchase price, with an 8% interest rate, required a monthly payment of over $2,700, effectively doubling the cost of housing. For the end consumer, the fatal error made by national home-building conglomerates, such as D.R. Horton, Lennar, and Pult Homes, was their systemic failure to stop production when the interest rate shock hit. Large-scale corporate homebuilders operate on highly rigid, long-term capital deployment schedules. They purchase land options years in advance, enter into binding horizontal construction contracts for roads and utilities, and secure bulk material deliveries on strict timelines. Halting a major subdivision halfway through development triggers immediate, massive financial penalties, breaches of contract, and severe write-downs on corporate balance sheets. Consequently, these firms chose to run a dangerous gamble. They continued to pull permits, pour concrete foundations, and erect timber frames throughout 2023 and 2024, betting that the Federal Reserve would capitulate and lower interest rates before the homes were completed. This corporate gamble completely failed. Data from the Atlanta Realtors Association confirms that by mid-2024, the mismatch between builder expectations and consumer reality had reached a breaking point. While the builders were churning out thousands of completed structures priced for a 3% rate world, the actual pool of qualified local buyers who could afford an 8% mortgage had shrunk by over 60%. Local median household incomes in outer counties like Henry and Newton hovered around $65,000 per year, making the newly built $450,000 corporate tracts entirely inaccessible to the local workforce. The out-of-state remote workers who had previously fueled the bidding wars were increasingly recalled to physical offices in urban centers, leaving the newly constructed exurban subdivisions sitting in a total demand vacuum. By the first quarter of 2025, the historical geographic trap of the Atlanta perimeter had fully closed. The unchecked permitting decisions made by local officials 3 years prior materialized as thousands of physical, vacant structures draining corporate cash reserves. According to analytics from MetroStudy, the volume of under-construction and completed vacant inventory in the northern and southern exurban corridors reached its highest level since the 2008 financial collapse. The builders had locked themselves into a brutal structural bottleneck. They could not stop building without declaring massive corporate losses, and they could not sell their inventory without completely destroying the local price floor. The stage was set for an unprecedented, aggressive clash between institutional sellers desperate to liquidate their assets and a highly resistant, financially constrained consumer base. The reality on the ground across the outer rings of the Atlanta metropolitan area has shifted from a subtle slowdown into a highly volatile corporate price war. As of mid-2026, the structural standoff between national home-building conglomerates and the local real estate market is producing severe distortions in property values. This deep dive into the current localized data reveals the exact mechanisms being deployed by institutional sellers to force transactions in an oversaturated market, and the profound economic friction developing between local municipal infrastructure and corporate residential planning in Dallas, located within Paulding County. The inventory overhang has forced corporate builders to aggressively undercut private residential sellers. Recent multi-listing service data indicates that active inventory in this specific submarket is sitting 42% higher than historical seasonal averages. To combat this stagnation, corporate entities are utilizing deep capital reserves to offer non-traditional financial incentives that an individual homeowner cannot match. Builders are routinely absorbing up to $15,000 in direct buyer closing costs and financing temporary or permanent interest rate buydowns. By paying upfront points to lenders to artificially lower a buyer's mortgage rate from 7% to 5.5%, corporate sellers are distorting the true market value of the real estate. This practice masks a systemic drop in asset values, as the recorded purchase price remains high while the net cash received by the builder drops significantly. Further east in Loganville, the conflict is manifesting as a direct confrontation between corporate build-to-rent operations and traditional single-family homeowners. Throughout late 2024 and 2025, major institutional buyers like Progress Residential and Invitation Homes purchased entire blocks of unsold builder inventory with the intention of converting them into permanent rental tracts. This sudden shifting of neighborhood demographics has triggered an intense backlash from local homeowners associations and city councils, who argue that high-density rental conversions are depressing surrounding property values and overwhelming local municipal resources. Data from regional court filings shows a sharp increase in litigation surrounding subdivision covenants, as local communities attempt to legally restrict corporate rental entities from occupying newly completed phases. Meanwhile, municipal records reveal that 30% of all single-family homes currently listed for sale in Loganville have undergone a public price reduction of at least 10%, showing that the downward pressure on pricing has broken out of the new construction sector and is actively bleeding into the broader resale market. In Winder and Locust Grove, the crisis is rapidly transitioning from a financial issue into a severe infrastructure emergency. In Barrow and Henry counties, local planning departments permitted thousands of homes without requiring the corresponding corporate investment in public services. In Locust Grove, the local Chamber of Commerce recently published a report indicating that commercial infrastructure vacancy has ticked up to 14% in newly developed areas. Developers built thousands of houses, but failed to attract the commercial retail tax base needed to subsidize county services. Consequently, the local two-lane road networks are experiencing permanent congestion, and public water and sewage systems are operating at near maximum capacity. Furthermore, data from CoreLogic indicates that builder profit margins in these southern corridors have compressed by an estimated 22% over the last year, leading to a visible drop in the quality of construction materials and finishing work. As developers look for ways to cut costs on lagging projects, the situation in northern suburbs, like Canton and Covington, highlights the total disconnect between local wage growth and institutional pricing strategies. In Cherokee County, the median household income is entirely failing to keep pace with the carrying costs of these newly constructed subdivisions. According to data from the United States Census Bureau, there is a 20% deficit between what the local median earner can afford and the monthly payment required for the current average listing price in Canton. To entice buyers, developers are offering outside real estate agents uncharacteristically high commissions, sometimes up to 4% plus cash bonuses, to funnel clients toward empty inventory. In Covington, the stagnation is even more pronounced, with Zillow data showing that 25% of all active listings have been sitting entirely idle on the market for more than 90 days. Exposed to the intense Georgia humidity without climate control or regular maintenance, creating long-term structural risks for future owners, the climax of this structural failure is visible in McDonough and Cumming, where high contract cancellation rates are actively destabilizing ongoing phases of development. In Forsyth County, which was previously considered an ironclad luxury market, the contract cancellation rate has spiked to an alarming 24%. Buyers are routinely forfeiting five-figure earnest money deposits because they recognize that identical homes in subsequent phases are being appraised for significantly less than their contracted price. When a buyer walks away, the home transitions into a stagnant asset that the builder must maintain, insure, and pay taxes on. In McDonough, mortgage tracking data from Black Knight reports that 15% of recently completed homes were liquidated at a verified net loss to the builder just to clear them from corporate balance sheets. This aggressive corporate liquidation has effectively destroyed the appraisal comparable data for surrounding neighborhoods, making it nearly impossible for existing homeowners to refinance their properties or sell without bringing cash to the closing table.